Benigno S. Aquino Jr. was born on November 27, 1932 and died on August 21, 1983. He was born in Concepcion, Tarlac, and his father's name is Benigno Aquino Sr. His mother is Doña Aurora Aquino. He studied grade school at St. Joseph College of Quezon City, high school at San Beda College, went to Ateneo de Manila, and studied law at UP. In October 11, 1954, he married Corazon Aquino and they have 5. At the age of 17, he was the youngest war correspondent to cover the Korea War for the newspaper The Manila Times of Joaquin Chino Rosas. Because of his journalistic feats, he received the Philippine Legion of Honor Award for President Elpidio Quirino at the age of 18. He became a Filipino senator and a former governor of Tarlac. Aquino was assassinated on August 21, 1983, when he was shot in the head after returning to the country. Today, I am going to report an excerpt from speech entitled "The Filipino is Worth Dying For," delivered by Benigno Aquino Jr. on August 4, 1980, in New York City, addressed to Ferdinand Marcos. I have spent almost 8 long and lonely years in the military confinement. The problem of martial rule and its injustices have nagged me all these years. During those 8 years, I learned the true meaning of humiliation, of courage, of hunger and endless anxiety. Rather than be bitter, I have learned to accept my suffering as a cleansing process and a rare opportunity to really grapple with the problems of the Filipino. I have asked myself many times, is the Filipino worth suffering or even dying for? Is he not a coward who would readily yield to any colonizer, be he foreign or homegrown? Is a Filipino more comfortable under an authoritarian leader because he does not want to be burdened with the freedom of choice? Is he unprepared or worse, ill-suited for presidential or parliamentary democracy? I have carefully weighed the virtues and the faults of the Filipino, and I have come to the conclusion that he is worth dying for because he is the nation's greatest and top resource. I have faced that a couple of times in prison. In 1975, I went on a hunger strike for 40 days and 40 nights, and I was near that when the jailers rushed me to the Veterans Hospital. I faced that in your detention camp when your army doctors diagnosed my heart ailment as mere muscle spasm, only to be told by a doctor in the United States that I could have died from heart attacks while I was languishing in your jail. Mr. Marcos, please believe me when I tell you that, like the average Filipino, I will again willingly face that in a freedom struggle if you will not heed the voice of the conscience and moderation. You were a soldier once, and you have repeatedly said many times, it is an honor to die for one's country and for one's freedom. I hope you will now believe in what you preach and pray that you shall at last desist from further trying the patience and resolve of your countrymen. Mr. Marcos, give us back our freedom or suffer the consequences of your arrogance. The motive of Ninoy in writing this essay is to convince Marcos to give back the freedom of the Filipinos, since according to Ninoy, the Filipinos are definitely prepared for democracy. The implication was that if worse comes to worse, that if Marcos would not grant the Filipinos democracy, Ninoy would be ready to die for that freedom and that revolution would start because, as Ninoy had stated, the Filipino would wait until his patience runs out. Ninoy also gave Marcos an ultimatum that if Marcos would not give back their freedom, he would suffer the consequences of his arrogance. Ninoy wrote this essay and delivered it as a speech before the Asia Society in New York on August 4, 1980. This was after almost 8 years since his imprisonment due to the Marcos proclamation of martial law. In this speech, he recalled his experiences and the insights while he is in prison, and most importantly, his reflection that the Filipino is worth dying for. This speech served as an open letter to Marcos back then. After hearing this speech, as a Filipino of today, are you still worth dying for?